Why don't we go ahead and get started? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Blackett, and I'm the co-director for the KL2 Scholars Program, and welcome to our K Club for August. We will almost certainly have more people joining us as we go along. We had a good number of people registered, so we'll let them pop in as they become available. We have two speakers today, and I'm going to do very quick introductions so that they have as much time as possible to talk to you about a great topic, communicating your science. So as you've already noticed, we've got two Tims, Tim Tedeschi, sorry, and they're no particular order. So Tim 1 or Tim 2, you get to decide, is the Public Information Officer for Media Relations and Content, Content Team Marketing and Communications here at UC. And then Tim Bonfield is a Senior Associate in Marketing and Communications at Children's Hospital. So we have one person from each institution, just in case there are some similarities or differences in how we communicate our science across those two organizations. With that, I will pass the baton over to Krista, who's going to keep advancing the slides, and I will mute myself. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. There is time at the end as well for that, or should be time at the end as well. And just one friendly reminder as we get started, there will be a survey that Krista will send out, an evaluation for today's presentation. So expect to see that in the next couple of days. And thank you again for being here. And thanks to our speakers for their time.
All right, thanks so much, Dr. Blackard. Appreciate that introduction. And I'll admit at the beginning, I think the better Tim is coming up a little bit later, but appreciate you all inviting me and having me here. So I'm going to talk today about telling your story and the before, during, and after of preparing for a media interview. If you go to the next slide, please. So first off, let's talk about why work with the media in the first place. And you are all experts in your field. You did all the education, the training, you're on the job, and you know your topic of expertise better than most people in the general public. So when you're working with the media, you have the opportunity to provide that expertise to the community and help the public understand different situations that are going on. You help the media get the story right. You think about the COVID-19 pandemic over the past few years. Obviously, it's been so important to have experts out there explaining things and making sure that the right information is being disseminated. On the other side, working with the media also helps promote and support our institutions, UC and Children's, and in some cases, both. I know that I've worked with researchers who said, hey, that story got on national news, and I had some more interest in further grant funding. I know there's been some that said, hey, that story got put out, and there's a collaborator across the country who wants to partner on the next stage of our research. So it can help increase your research profile and increase the work that you're doing. And in some scenarios, the media is going to get the story out with or without you. So providing that expertise, again, helps make sure that story that gets out is correct. You can go to the next slide, please. So as Dr. Blackard said, I'm a public information officer. I know at Children's, the terminology is a little bit different, but work in media relations. What does that mean? We're PR people, we work in communications and media relations. I personally publish stories on our UC News site that is also shared with the media, help coordinate interviews, talk a little bit about that in a little bit. And we encourage you to establish a working relationship with your media relations team. If you have a manuscript that's going to be published soon, a new grant, that sort of thing, let us know about it. And I know Tim has a great slide later with a little flow chart of deciding how best to do that. But let us know when that's coming so we can decide how to best promote that. If there's trends in the field that you see, hey, everybody is talking about this and I'm an expert, can I talk to media about that? Let us know about that. And then also if media cold calls you out of the blue, wants to talk with you, let us know about that so we can help facilitate those interviews. Next slide, please. So I already started to talk a little bit about this, how PIOs and media relations can help you. We can help advise you on media relations, help facilitate those media interviews, prepare you for interviews, get you some background of, oh, I've worked with this reporter before, they're great, you're going to have a great experience with them, that sort of thing. Do mock interviews if you want a little bit of practice beforehand. We also try to be with you during the interview and monitor what happens with the interview after it takes place. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about how the media works. Reporters live on their deadlines, even with the 24-hour news cycle. I know sometimes I'll get a call from a reporter saying, it's 9 in the morning. I need somebody by 11:30 this morning to talk about that. So sometimes they're on these really tight deadlines that we have to work with. I am a former print reporter myself, an editor, and I can say from experience that the majority of reporters in mainstream media outlets, in reputable news outlets, they're doing their jobs just like you. They're good at what they do, and they're trying to get the story right. They're not trying to have these gotcha moments where you're painted into a corner. They're not trying to make the institution look bad. They just want to get the story right. Next slide, please. And let's also talk about what is news. News is really anything that editors and reporters feel is going to interest their readers and viewers. Sometimes we get media requests that, from my perspective, from the researcher's perspective, it's like, maybe this is just common sense. Why is this going to be a piece on the news? Why is this going to be a story? But if the editors think that it is, and if the general public needs to know, then it is news. Obviously, trends, breakthroughs in research can be news as well. I know recently there's been a lot of controversy in the Alzheimer's research realm with the Science Magazine investigation. So we put our experts out there to talk about that, even if it's not something positive and anything unusual going on. So next we're going to talk about what a successful interview looks like and go over some of the basics, some do's and don'ts, and kind of what that process looks like. If you go to the next slide, please. So here's some basics. Obviously, always tell the truth in life, but also especially when you're talking to the media, and try to be as prepared as you can. And I'll go over some practical tips for how you can be best prepared. We encourage researchers when they're talking with media that it's okay to say that you don't know. It's much better to do that than to speculate and to maybe paint yourself in a corner for something you didn't really want to say. We encourage you to know the audience that you're speaking to. Obviously, there's some media that is focused on medical science researchers, kind of going to that specific industry audience that knows what these terms mean compared to the general public. So just kind of know what kind of audience you're looking for. And also let the reporter know how much time you have so that they can structure it in the most efficient way for both of them. When scheduling an interview, a lot of times we're happy to take that work on for you as much as we can. If you just let us know your availability, we can help work out all of those little details of the date, the time, location, whether it's on Zoom or they're meeting you in person, all of those sort of things. But it's also important to know you don't have to do an interview if media reaches out to you. I actually just yesterday had a situation where a podcast reached out and said, hey, we want to talk to your researcher about this. Looked on their website, and some of their episodes recently were what doctors don't want you to know about skin cancer, and this superfood is going to heal all your diseases. Obviously, they're not reputable, not working in good faith, so we declined that interview. Obviously, you're also all have busy schedules, so it's not reasonable every time that you can just hop on an interview 5 minutes after you get the request. But also remember that reporters have these deadlines and they can't wait around for you. And if you're trying to say, oh, I can do that in 2 weeks, the news cycle is probably going to move on before you can get to that. You're going to miss that opportunity. Next slide, please. So when preparing for an interview, just try to have as much information going in as you can. You're obviously an expert on the topic if they're talking to you, but try to get more details from the reporter, and we can help with this as well, of exactly what they want to discuss. And then think about some of the logistical details. Is this a phone interview? Is it face-to-face? Is it over Zoom? Is this something where you'll be on camera for a TV interview? Is it just print? We encourage people, if it is an on-camera interview, to kind of brand yourself and wear maybe a lab coat with the institution logo on it. If you're a UC researcher, wear some red and black, maybe a lapel pin with your institution on it, just to kind of reinforce that expertise and tie to the institution. And one big thing we really emphasize is try to prepare 3 to 5 points that you really want to get across during the interview. And you can even write these down and bring them to the interview. But we also do caution, never, even if you're as prepared as you think you can be, please don't read off of what you've prepared, because it comes off robotic and the reporter probably isn't going to use that anyway. But it's good to have as a reference and then speak extemporaneously once you're in the interview itself. You can also check who else will be interviewed. Maybe there's a colleague from a different institution that partnered with the research you're talking about, and they can talk more specifically about that area of the project. And you can speak about what you did best. And then obviously interview on your time when you're ready. So within the question and answer back and forth of an interview, obviously you want to listen to the reporter's questions, and hopefully it will be a conversation with the reporter. The good reporters, it will feel like a conversation rather than an interrogation, which it can feel like sometimes if things aren't going well. And we encourage people to use this kind of formula if there's a question that's asked that's a little bit off center, maybe not exactly what one of your talking points is trying to be. You can use this formula, Q equals A plus 1. So Q is the question, A is the answer to the actual question they asked, and then 1 is bridging to the actual point or agenda that you are trying to make. So if we go to the next slide, please. There's an example of this. So the question is, how did this error happen? You can answer that question. We're not certain how it happened. And then with the +1 transition to, we're still investigating the cause, and we'll cease this procedure until we know exactly what happened. So now I'm going to talk through some do's and don'ts when you're in an interview. Don't give your personal opinions. You're speaking for the institution and not for yourself. Obviously, I talked earlier about don't speculate. It's okay to say, I don't know. And sometimes reporters will say, well, I heard Jane Smith tell me this about what's going on at Children's. What do you think about that? Or I have an anonymous source saying that there's this big scandal going on. What do you think of that? You don't need to respond to hearsay and to anonymous sources. That's not why you were chosen for this interview, and that's not something that you need to engage with. Another important thing that I tell my researchers before they are doing interviews is don't go off the record. Always assume you're on the record from the time you say hello to the reporter all the way to the time you say goodbye. Even if they've stopped recording, even if their camera is put away, you're still on the record. You still want to represent yourself and your institution well, and don't say anything that you wouldn't want to appear on the news, even if they've stopped recording. Try not to use jargon, going back to knowing your audience and what the general public will know. And also sometimes reporters, maybe after you finish an answer, they're still finishing taking notes, or they're trying to formulate their next question. Don't feel obligated to fill that silence if you've already said what you were trying to say. It might feel awkward, but it's better to do that than to give a rambling answer that doesn't have much meaning behind it. Some other things, try not to speak in monotone and to add inflection. Don't talk down to the reporter. And obviously this is something you can even hear in my presentation, but try not to use filler words such as and and that's something obviously I think a lot of us can try to improve on. And another thing is sometimes reporters will phrase a question that's really a statement with a yes or no question at the end. So they'll say, well, you're the best researcher in your field, are you not? And they're putting those words in your mouth. Even if it's something that you agree with, rephrase it a way that you want to say it rather than just saying yes and letting them put those words in your mouth. We recommend never responding no comment. And obviously if you're speaking about a clinical trial or something like that, you don't speak about specific patients with HIPAA compliance in mind, obviously, unless they've consented to that. So on the other side, let's talk about some things to always do. Try to be empathetic, speak clearly. And the opposite of using jargons is using analogies. I just worked with one of our cancer biology researchers on the story, and he did a great job saying the lysosome in the cell is like the recycling center. The mitochondria in the cell is like the power plant. And that's something that me personally, as a layperson and the general public, is going to understand. There's going to be some times where your research hinges on a technical term or a process that you can't get away with, but try to explain that as best you can in terms that a layperson will understand. You can always ask a reporter to repeat a question if you don't understand it, or if they've kind of started to ramble and have lost the thread there, and try to speak in conclusions and support them with concise, quotable details. Some other things to always do: please try to come off as passionate about what you're discussing, because if you're the expert and you're not excited about it, why is anyone reading or listening or watching? They're not going to care either. Again, going back to always being on the record, only say what you would be comfortable seeing in print or hearing on air. And then if it's an on-camera interview, a lot of times people will try to focus on the camera or kind of get psyched out by the camera, but try just to talk to the reporter themselves. The camera will find you and maintain that eye contact, even if it's a little bit intimidating to know that the camera is on you. And then again, in trying to be empathetic, also try to be confident, but not cocky. And then turn off your cell phones and pagers, eliminate those distractions, have their full attention. After an interview, a lot of times reporters will say, well, I think those are all the questions I had. Anything else that you wanted to touch on? And that's a great time for you to review your main points, to say, well, you know what? I think we touched it all. I just wanted to make sure you knew A, B, and C. Or if there's something you haven't been able to talk about, that's a great time to pull one of your talking points out and say, oh, one other thing, I wanted to make sure you knew this. And you can ask the reporter if there's anything that they need clarified, remind them how to get in contact with you for follow-up questions. And reporters aren't going to let you proofread wholesale their whole story, but you can offer to proofread facts or quotes, make sure the science is accurate and that statistics are correct. And this is something, again, that PIOs can help with, but you can ask when the story will be published as well. So one last thing, when you're doing an interview, it's important to know that, kind of important to manage your expectations. Sometimes you might be an entire 5-minute story on the 6 o'clock news. You might be a front page story on the Cincinnati Enquirer with only your quotes. Sometimes it's reduced to 5-second soundbite, or in the introduction to a story on the news, they say, a University of Cincinnati or Cincinnati children's researcher told me this, and then they go into it. That's not a reflection of your performance in the interview. It's just the nature of the business. And it's still valuable to give that expertise, again, going back to what I talked about in the beginning, to make sure that they're getting the story out right and that we're lending our expertise as best we can. So my last slide there, if you go to the next one, I just have some examples. I think Krista will be sharing these with you as well, so you can check those out later. But that's all I have, and I will pass it on to Tim too.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for your time today. I appreciate being invited to speak with you. And thanks a lot, Tim, for your presentation. I would recommend, taking that to the bank in terms of, regardless of which institution you're dealing with, those were excellent tips on how to deal with an interview, anytime in your career down the line. So thank you very much for that. So my goal today is to talk about how to share your science when maybe the media itself is not going to write about it, but we're going to promote it anyway, because it's important whether the media figured it out or not. So the people at Cincinnati Children's that we work with, that work with you guys on getting that news out, are listed here. My boss, Jen Tan, is, the when in doubt, contact her if you're not sure of our specific team members. But I'm our main science writer, and I edit our Research Horizons blog. You may have seen that. If you haven't, please take a look. And we put out e-newsletters that are based on blog content and media releases that are also appear on the blog, as well as going out in official news releases. I also edit the research annual report for the Cincinnati Children's, and I do a lot of our science tweeting. The other folks on our team, Barrett and Bo and Michael, have different beats, and basically I don't want to try to go through that, because Jen will help guide you to the right place so that we can divide up the work. Next slide, please. So our media relations team is part of our external communications job. We have social media channels, and we work with those people. We have official social media channels, our Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels. And if you have messaging that you want to get out on an official channel like that, these are the people to contact. Otherwise, you can use your personal channel, and I'll get into that in a little bit later. We have a national media consulting agency, the Edelman Agency, that works with us when we feel like we have a national scale story that we're trying to pitch to the New York Timeses of the world, and they get involved with that. And some of you may have encountered our marketing team members, several of our service lines, especially those that are aligned with the U.S. News and World Report clinical division departments. Those people, those divisions have people from the marketing team assigned to them. So sometimes they can help guide you to us if you're dealing with them. Next slide. So this is a flow chart that we came up with to try to help people figure out, I've got my research paper is the best paper I've ever done in my career, but is it news? And so we're trying at our level to get the biggest, most impactful science out to the public. So we created this flow chart that basically any of these questions, if they come up yes, the default is contact us and let us know about it. Couple of rules of thumb, a high impact journal. We kind of look, for those of you who pay attention to impact factors, this is not an absolute, but we kind of look at, we'll look at it pretty much anything that's a impact factor of 7 and up. But beyond that, it's about the science. So if the science is actually a major discovery that's going to change the paradigm, it's going to affect a lot of people, those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. And you can go through this chart to kind of get a sense of why you might want to talk about it. And to some people, I say one of the easiest shortcuts is, do you think this would be your department or division's paper of the year? If you think it's even in the ballpark of that, then yes, you should be letting us know about it. Next slide. So once you do tell us about a paper, we kind of go through a tiering process that starts with the biggest deal papers that we can kind of consider national scale. We want to get this on broadcast, on print, everywhere. We're talking about findings that are in major journals, and they're also findings that have a clear public level of interest in them, and usually across topics. So we might see 5 or 6 of these in a year. And what we do with those is we really get into detail and plan these out in a custom kind of way to throw the kitchen sink at them. Videos, photography, illustrations if they're needed. We really want these stories to shine. Tier 2 is our bread and butter. This is good science in strong journals that makes a difference. You're absolutely certain other scientists are going to care about it, and very likely the people that are affected by that condition are going to care about it, and so possibly thought leader types or business interests will be interested in these findings. Like I say, use that chart to kind of get a sense of it. This is where we put most of our time, is in these kinds of tier 2 stories. The tier 3 ones, these are important, but I like to call them inside baseball. Sometimes these are the tools for other scientists, methods and very early stage basic research that is, a long way away from having a clinical impact, but it's important to share with a science community. We're really looking to count on you guys to be your own promoters of this kind of information. We support it when we can, but these are the ones we might respond back and say we don't have bandwidth to support. So next slide. So why does self-promotion matter? Next slide. Cincinnati Children's alone, the researchers here publish more than 2,000 papers a year. We do not write about all 2,000 papers. So your paper is important to you. It's important to your audience. Every paper has an audience. It just might not be one that we can put our institutional resources behind. Traditionally, people, do your poster presentations, you go to scientific meetings, you publish in the journal, and that's great. Those are all crucial things, but it's really not enough anymore. A number of studies, and this one linked here shows it in some detail, but if you are active on social media and you share your science on social media, it tends to get more attention, and that has shown up over time as a way of getting more citations and so forth for your work, which echoes the thing that Tim was saying about participating with the media, is that, when your story is out there, other people hear it and other people connect with you. So that's an important reason for doing this kind of work. Next slide. So if you aren't already active in social media, you might find yourself going, well, which channel should I get involved in? Here at Cincinnati Children's anyway, we really emphasize Twitter and LinkedIn as sort of first choices. Twitter is increasingly used by our faculty. It's got a very newsy overall feel to it. It's very quick. It's kind of like news headlines. You can share hard science there and not feel like you're talking over people's heads. A lot of people have built significant networks on Twitter. One of our top docs on there has as many as 10,000 followers. So you can build a network that can be substantial. LinkedIn, and also important here is the altmetric score. I'm sure many of you have seen altmetric scores attached to your paper. When the news media mentions your paper, you get points. But even if the news media doesn't mention it, but people are talking about it on Twitter, you get points. And so that's good for your, in general, your altmetric scores. And different institutions they still vary on how much weight they put into altmetric scores in terms of your career advancement and so forth. But some grant applications, I've seen people using altmetric scores of their past research as part of their justification for why they should get more funding. LinkedIn has traditionally been a job networking sort of service, and it's still very important for recruiting, but I've seen quite a bit of hard science being shared around on LinkedIn. And we think it's partly because there's a lot of people who are not specifically scientists who are very interested in science news for various reasons, like investments, business opportunities, they might be vendors, a lot of things like that, where they're interested in that field. And LinkedIn's kind of like professional Facebook. You're not sharing as much of this is what I had for lunch, but it's more professional in that way. And so I think people feel comfortable sharing sort of their business life, their professional life on LinkedIn. So it's a pretty good spot for that. We see that Facebook obviously is huge and massive, and it's widely used by the general public, but our Facebook channel at Children's is really aimed at the consumers. So if you want to reach parents of kids with your message, then Facebook makes a lot of sense. But if you're trying really to talk to other scientists, you're going to get a lot of sort of sideways chatter that's not really targeted for Facebook. We're watching Instagram and TikTok. There's some people that have danced their PhDs and so forth, but we're not supporting those channels as science news right now. But we are interested in hearing how people use those, and that is, I think this is a moving target. Next slide. So if you haven't already been on social media and are using it on a regular basis, our recommendation is just get started. These channels are your channels, not the institutions. You're speaking for yourself. And the best way to do it is get involved and start doing it and start seeing who else is on the channel that you choose to use. You'll find people that are in your field that you know and have heard of, and basically learn from them. Watch what they're doing, see what methods and techniques that they're using, and kind of learn by mimicking until you build your own voice. You grow your network over time, and you do this best by really kind of having an understanding of your audience. So it's important, even if you aren't posting, to be on there to listen and sometimes engage and take a look at it as a form of serving an audience. Like that educational opportunity is key here. And we talk about this being a person, not a billboard. If the only reason you get on Twitter is to announce that you had a paper and you never look at Twitter again, and you never say anything about anything to anybody, you're just a commercial and people won't follow you. Meanwhile, one way to do that, if you're not sure where you should sort of jump in to do things, you can praise other people that you respect. Like if you see science that you think is really important, congratulate them. And that's a good way of building up your network, because other people will see the congratulations and they'll start following you and so forth. And so supporting your team, your colleagues, your institution is always handy. Next slide. This is my version of do's and don'ts. Common sense is just not very common these days. And so the main first message is don't embarrass your boss, right? So don't embarrass Cincinnati Children's, don't embarrass UC. Everything you say on social media is in fact public, even if you think you're talking in a closed group. There's nothing stopping somebody else from that group from copying what you say and posting it somewhere for everybody to see. So always have that in mind when you're active on social media. You can advocate, you're a citizen, you have a point of view. There's nothing wrong with expressing your point of view, but understand that if you get into controversial politics, you can get into fights that turn ugly really fast. And we have seen very, very instantaneous blowback in controversial topics, and people have been fired for making their institutions look bad. So you have to keep that in mind. Obviously, it should go without saying, but like I say, common sense is not common. So you can't share personal, HIPAA protected health information. Be very careful with sharing intellectual property. And what we ask people to do is, yes, this is your channel, and make this clear when you have a profile. Put something in your bio that's a disclaimer that says, something like, opinions expressed here do not reflect the views of my employer. That's useful for everybody involved. Next slide. That's really the kind of the watch outs. And this is contact information for me. And if you're wondering about a research paper and whether or not it's news, this is how to get it in front of me. And then we can get our team going. Every week I host a weekly research news huddle where the people who have contacted various members of our team about upcoming papers, we bring those together and we try to put them into that 3-tiered system and make sure we understand who's writing about what and go from there. So I wanted to move through that so that we could have plenty of time for questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you to you both for presenting. And looks like we have plenty of time for questions, so feel free to simply unmute yourself and ask away, or if you'd like to use the chat, we can do it that way too.
Hi, I'd like to ask a question.
Please go ahead.
I was in a situation where I was working in the community and someone else had called the news to come to this this event, I'll say, that we were hosting. And I was doing it as part of a research project with other collaborators. And I was really worried about if I was allowed to talk to the media without children's knowing about it. Can you kind of speak to that when things happen sort of on the fly? Or is it okay to go ahead and speak, or should you not represent yourself as being part of children's?
That's a great question, Kim. Thank you. The main thing we want is to avoid being surprised. So some of it is you're going to have to judge the situation. Are they asking you? It depends partly on what the questions are. But if they're asking you why you're here, there's nothing wrong about, you're not doing this in secret. You can explain your role in whatever the community activity is and so forth. But we would ask you to try to let us know as soon as you can that media was at this event, so that we can and sometimes what we would do is contact that media and ask them if they need any other information that maybe you aren't. And if you don't feel like you're the right person to talk to, that's when you can say, please, contact the media relations team. They'll be glad to help you if we have comments on that. So, if it's innocuous, it's one thing, but if it's somebody saying, well, what are you up to out here? You can use us as your excuse to not talk to them. Tim, do you want to add to that?
No, yeah, I think you covered that well. That was pretty much the same thing I was going to say. We always like to be informed and help avoid any pitfalls or sketchy situations or things like that. But yeah, if it's something innocuous, then you can use your discretion to a certain point.
Yeah, I think one thing that's can be an issue here is where like maybe there's a protest going on downtown and you're down at Fountain Square because you're passionate about an issue. In that case, you're speaking as a citizen, and you're absolutely allowed to speak as a citizen. But I wouldn't go out of my way to let them know where you work unless it's some particular reason for that. I mean, like if you're a speaker at the event, then you are who you are. But if you're down there carrying your sign, talk about your issue, but you don't have to bring up your company.
I wonder if you could comment on one of the things that you said earlier about Facebook. And I guess I understand the different types of social media, but for some of us that are a little perhaps less sophisticated, I think you mentioned things kind of going sideways. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, are we just talking about you post a research article and somebody is trashing you in the comments, or were you referring to something else that we need to think about?
Yeah, our sense has been that there's just a lot more trolling, political bots and trolls and people that are looking for trouble out in the Facebook space. We tend to see more controversy pop up there faster. We saw a lot of it with the vaccine issue. I mean, if we could say the most innocuous thing about announcing a vaccine clinic and get attacked on Facebook. And so we're going to do the right thing anyway in terms of our institutional needs and the priorities for health and so forth. But you're more likely to walk into a buzzsaw very quickly on Facebook, mostly because it's just so huge. You can limit that somewhat by only talking to your friends. That makes a difference, but people will find you anyway. And I need to constantly reemphasize that aspect. You can think you're talking to a private group, but you're not.
Yeah.
And that's important to remember, because people say rude things about people all the time on social media. I hate this politician. I can't stand that person. They're evil. Da 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 da. Yeah, that's where you start attracting attention, and so you have to be prepared. Twitter will do that too. Twitter is 100% public. I mean, in that sense, you can't really have. There is no private. There's next to no private tweeting that can occur. So I think people are a little bit more aware of that. I think people talk personally about things on Facebook more than they do on Twitter, maybe just because of the understanding of the yeah.
Great, thank you. Questions from the audience? Feel free to unmute yourself or unvideo yourself. That's not the right word, but turn your camera on, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Well, I would ask this group, how many of you guys are active on Twitter already? Do you all have accounts?
You might. I was wondering how many people would say yes to that too, and I say no. And I'm curious. I see one person raising their thumb, so we might be a small group in that regard.
I have an account, but I haven't checked it or looked at it in years.
Yeah, that's me.
That's fair. I mean, and it depends, if you're, we have at Children's, we have some pretty active users who they're interesting to sort of follow to see what they're talking about. And if nothing else, you can kind of be one of those silent social media readers who kind of look for what other people are talking about. And sometimes that'll give you an idea of where you can contribute, especially if you haven't thought about this as something that is valuable for your time. I would contend that it's, I've been in this business for a number of years now, and I would say 10, 15 years ago, many scientists were highly skeptical of being involved in social media. That's less and less true. I know, for example, our hospital medicine group at Children's is very active on Twitter. In fact, they're going around teaching other scientists at things like PHM and so forth. And so those are some good people to look at for leadership in what professionals can do. I mean, Patty Manning is on from our organization. I mean, what we haven't done yet is build accounts for our senior executives. Some big organizations kind of put people behind that. We haven't really quite gone there yet. Santa Ono at UC was famous for his activity in that regard.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And so, it's a personal decision. And we say to any of our faculty members, we are not requiring anybody to do any of this. This is an issue of what you choose to do to, disseminate your science. We're just trying to make it clear that we may not be able to do a release about your paper. And so it's really important for you to be your own best cheerleader. And, and to our way of thinking, it's like, well, why wouldn't you tweet out about your latest publication?
And to add on to that too, I was just in a situation, I was mentioning that Alzheimer's research controversy where I reached out to one of our researchers and was putting together a press release saying he was available to comment to media. And he said, oh yeah, you can take what I posted on LinkedIn. We've been talking about this and in our community, and he's been a leader there. So he was talking with the scientific community before he was talking with the general public, and he was already prepared in that way. So that's another area where sometimes with our limited staff, media relations is always trying to help you all as much as you can, but maybe you can get your story out first and then we can come alongside you and help lift that up.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but if an investigator thinks that they have a finding that'd be worthy of being promoted by the institution, I guess what's your guidance of kind of, I guess what criteria they should be thinking of before they consider contacting your team, and who would be the right point person from your team if they want to consider asking if their finding could be promoted by the institutional social media channels?
So if we could go back to that little slide that has the chart on it, the flow chart. Is that possible? Yeah. So this is where I would suggest that you kind of run your topic through this garden, and if you get a yes on any of these questions, then contact, your UC team if you're at UC, or contact the children's team. You can always contact me. That's why I put my contact information at the end. I'm glad to answer these kind of questions for any investigator who asks. But we do kind of have some of our people targeting different elements of our work. So it might not always be me. I might receive your question and then have someone else answer it for you. But we are more than glad to help you evaluate whether or not your paper is something that the public would be interested in. This gives you a good sense of that. Sometimes it's hard to judge your own work. I totally understand that. But when in doubt, contact us. Our biggest frustration from a media point of view is when somebody gets a big paper in like the New England Journal of Medicine or something and doesn't tell us about it at all until it's like 2 days before it comes out, or maybe after it comes out. We still have people doing that. And it's partly because they don't think about the media as part of their job at all. But if you do feel that you have work you want to get disseminated to the public, this is the way to do it. High impact journals, I mean, your field, what the best journals are in your particular specialty. 9 times out of 10, the top journal in your specialty is going to make it above that impact factor of 7. I can tell you in pediatrics that the journal Pediatrics is a impact factor of like 5. And we tell people at Children's that's why we say it's a loose rule of thumb, because we pay attention to articles that are in pediatrics. We will look at those and see whether or not they're something that we want to promote further, or if we have the resources to do so. As you go around through this thing, you can ask yourself, one of the problems one of our balancing act problems is when we're dealing with a rare disease, and many situations at Children's Hospital are rare diseases. So when a paper comes out, we're looking at those to say, well, did the finding, is it going to be a big deal for that particular audience? I mean, are we talking about like a new drug that's going to really improve treatment, or a discovery that's like a new gene that finally gives parents answers that they haven't had for years? Well, okay, we'll tell those stories. There was one recently about a very rare mutation called Tango2 that ended up being one of the most read articles on our science blog. And it was a story about one baby that had a really rare gene mutation, and there was decisions that had to be made about whether the parent would even have the baby, how much surgery would occur, because there was a lot of heart surgery and a lot of other stuff involved. And that turned into a story. So it can affect a few people, but if it's in a transformative way, we're interested in it. Same with kind of what I sometimes call Star Trek science. Like if we're doing something that is like organoid research here is in that category. We're years away from organoids being put in people, but the fact that we can grow human organoids in a lab dish at all just makes people's heads spin, and that's interesting. And so if you have that wow factor, that's really cool that we can talk about those kinds of things. So we will make room for basic science that leaders in that field consider transformational. We will find a way to tell that story to try to make it interesting to the public. Can't always win those.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the information, and I had one quick follow-up question. And once again, apologies if I missed this. I did unfortunately come a couple minutes late. But for students and scientists who are, who have social media channels and they're looking to promote their work, but they also want to be able to express their own personal opinions on certain causes or things that they may feel strongly about. Was there advice? I know you had said to be careful of engaging with posts, but is there any specific advice? Like, is there a phrase that you'd recommend that they put in their bio? Something like, these opinions are just my own, they don't represent the institution. Is there any type of a boilerplate or something like that that you recommend that people put on their Twitter?
Yes, we really do encourage people to put a disclaimer in their bio that says opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of my employer. Thanks, Leanne. That's a great chat contribution there. Yeah, and so please do that. Yes, a lot of people say essentially that this is my lane, right? This is an issue I'm concerned about as a human being, as a citizen, and you as a citizen are absolutely entitled to talk about how you feel about things. But when you start talking about what you do at your job, that's going to start getting fuzzy, and you have to be careful about whether you're bringing trouble to your institution. And it's a gut call. I mean, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule here. I mean, some people might say, just don't ever talk about politics ever. But that's not fair to ask.
Great. Are there any other questions for our speakers today?
Leanne, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with what Sarah asked, and Tim, thank you so much. It was an amazing presentation. Sarah, I'm also a communicator for Cincinnati Children's. I wanted to mention that if you are a Cincinnati Children's faculty or staff member, you have to abide by certain social media standards and policies that are put into place for all employees that represent our values. So we can share those in the chat as well. But that kind of are guidelines to ensure that we're not only representing ourselves well, but also the institution in a way.
Leanne, is that anywhere on
Thank you.
Centerlink?
Yes, it's on Centerlink. Let me find the link.
And actually, I'm a program manager here at UC for our MD PhD program. I'd heard some students actually ask that exact question and hadn't heard them get an answer. So yeah, I'll be sure to report that back to them. But thank you, Tim and Tim, for the helpful information, and to Leanne as well.
Yeah, Tim, Tim, I don't know if you might want to, if you have a UC policy on social media that you would want to share, but that's probably a good idea to share with this group.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I'm sure there is one, but I think I'm going to have to do some digging. So I'll check on that, and I can send that to Krista to disseminate.
See how he didn't go no comment? He said, I don't know.
Fair enough, right? Well,
That's how you do it.
thank you to our speakers and to our audience for staying engaged